And we're live. No, we're not really live, but
we're something. Apologies in advance. I am a little under the weather this week.
We'll make this as painless as possible.
Keeping the hot tea flowing through the vocal cords. You know, it just makes me sound more mysterious and interesting, so I'm fine with it.
What kind of tea you drinking?
I rock the Bigelow Lemon Lift for the nice mix of lemon and caffeine, hence the lift in the title.
Oh, okay, interesting.
You've actually seen my tea cabinet. It's actually absurd, so
yes.
keep a heavy rotation there.
Do you usually go with like honey in your tea, or
depends on the day, depends on the need. I do enjoy some honey and a good cup of tea though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll put some honey, some lemon, or occasionally, depending on what it is, I'll go with some half and half in there. But that's usually, you know, obviously
you go in the Captain Picard route with the Earl Grey.
Yeah, if you're under the weather, sometimes the half and half.
Yeah.
You know, the cream might curdle too much for you.
Yeah, could throw it off.
You know, or so I've been told.
Scholars.
I'm a fan of the herbal teas too.
I do like a good herbal tea.
You know,
I like the echinacea.
Yeah.
If you're having an issue, that's always good. Yeah, it's just there's too many different kinds of tea. There's too many different kinds of need for tea. You know, it's just,
there's just a plethora of tea.
You gotta keep it moving, keep it rotating, try new stuff.
I mean, I would say I am a fan of just the classic.
I generally like a black tea. I usually
black tea is good. You ever had? There's like a lavender tea out there. I had once.
I what's the brand that I do? I usually do a lavender chamomile.
Ooh, there it is.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There it is. You get the chamomile in there, and you're just like,
you got to brew those to like a high temperature though to get the maximum amount of them. So I got to be willing to wait for a cool down a little bit usually. Interesting
to think about too. Like, who do you ever thought was like, oh hey, I'm gonna take this plant, I'm gonna boil it in water.
Boil this plant.
Well, you just ever think about that? Like, it had to come from somewhere. It's like tea didn't exactly like exist naturally, right? Or is it more like you just stumbled upon it in nature like 500,000, 600,000 years ago?
Could
just
be.
Someone just found it like, you know, in the water and was like, ooh, this tastes good, or it has properties.
Or it's like Bill and Ted like accidentally gave it to Genghis Khan.
Yeah. Dude, tea.
We just remind ourselves to bring the Lipton with us.
We just reminded to bring it. Leaf water. Dude.
Oh my God, hilarious.
Well, speaking of extra like varieties and stuff and like different types of teas, we got one that I've been wanting to talk a little bit about, a little subject here.
Yeah, you've been mentioning this a little bit here.
Well, I think this is interesting because it's something, at least, and I'm going to focus more on the literature side, just the writing and the storytelling, particularly to books.
Mm-hmm.
Because I before coming on, I was like, I mean, it does pertain to as well in film and like TV, but maybe not quite the same as it would.
Yeah.
In written form.
Holds like a more significant purpose.
It's definitely one thing to think about if you're going to take on the idea of writing a book or a short story or even a poem.
Well, there's been a lot of things that I've heard recently, a lot of screen. One of the big things I heard about Oppenheimer was that they wrote it in the first person. And I was like, I've never heard of a script being written that way. So
no,
it's like
neither. I remember you telling me that. Yeah. And I think
there's like some small examples of it.
Yeah. I'm just more interested, like, how does that translate then to the shooting of the movie? Well, anyway, before we get too far into we are talking about points of view today. We're specifically the literary points of view.
Ye old POV.
Yes, and they are the main ones. You've got first person. We'll just kind of go through, you know, get familiar with these. I'm sure a lot of us have heard of them. And then there's one I've never even heard of until fairly recently. I was like, what? Are we just making stuff up now? But we got first person. That's usually when you're looking at a book, that's the I. Mm-hmm. You got second person, which rarely this is a rare one. This is the you, the informal you, you know, like you see it a lot. The most common one I've always heard for that is like a choose your own adventure book or something.
Yeah.
Like you open the door, or you try to open the door, it locks. Or even like Dungeons and Dragons sometimes when you're the DM.
Yeah. Depending on how, you know, you go with it.
You know, you can say it like, oh, you try but it doesn't work. That's
Yeah.
the second person. Third person limited. This is where you'll get the he, the she, they, or not they, which is kind of a combination of first person. You get third person omniscient. And then the newest one for me, fourth person, which, we'll maybe just touch on very, very briefly at the end.
Yeah.
But I was like, fourth person. I'm like, what's going on here with this? That was a new one for me. I don't know. Have you come across fourth person?
I genuinely don't know the context, so I'm interested to see here.
From so far,
I will say your last point here, part 8. I have seen multiple points of view.
Yeah,
things like what's the flick with Kevin Spacey, the Kaiser Soze.
Oh, The Usual Suspects.
Yeah, Usual Suspects. Like they kind of like he throws all like the fake points of view throughout the entirety of the story, and then like you find out at the end it was all him. Yeah, interesting. Well, but yeah, I would say the main ones from the literary form, the two big ones, first person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. Those tend to be your top ones that you work with. And I would even put for first person and then third person limited a little bit higher than omniscient. Just because omniscient's a little bit more difficult to write. Omniscient's tricky because, then you don't have any surprises. You don't have any, the reveals don't hit. Yeah,
because you have that ability to head hop, which we'll get to. So yeah, if we're talking about the age-old one, probably the one that, people tend to go with the most is the first person perspective.
Yeah.
In a book. And that is, everything is told. And for me, when you're coming down to writing a story, this is always, we'll go with our food analogy, our continuing, our
the reliable, old reliable.
Well, this is almost as if, okay, how are you going to prepare the food? You're gonna grill it, you're gonna saute it,
yes, chef.
Bake it, you're gonna flambe, you're gonna serve it cold.
Man, I gotta get you to watch The Bear. With how much we reference food stuff.
Food.
A story about crafting food is definitely up there for that metaphor. Yeah. It's pretty great.
First person is one of the points of view that you can write a story from. And you can certainly argue what's probably the most common. I would say this is the most natural when you're not even writing, when you're telling a story that you're in, you just automatically say, I, or you use like the plural version of like, we or my, that's mine. Everything is coming. The royal we. Yeah, everything is coming from that initial perspective of your own.
Yeah.
How many times, when you tell a story, or unless of course, sometimes you can have play to this to comedic effect. And Seinfeld did it with Jimmy in it.
Yeah. I like that one. That's
which I think we might have mentioned in our episode. I can't remember if that episode came up in the
I think
Seinfeld
it did.
Discussion. It was like,
I talk Seinfeld so much. It came up somewhere. I know that.
Yeah. Don't touch Jimmy, which of course is the comedy because who the hell refers to themselves in the third person?
Yeah, and the whole mishap of the asking out of Jimmy by Elaine. Just hilarious.
Not realize she's there thinking it's someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, POV, maybe I should define what POV is. It's literally just the narrative perspective from which a story is told.
Yeah.
This is literally
whose eyes are you looking through?
Yeah, what angle are we going to experience the story from? Who's going to be our way into the world of the story?
Our conduit.
Yes, thank you. There's a word I was looking for.
That's certainly a word.
Oh, 100% that's a word. Why? You think that's not a word?
No, I jest.
Yes, 100% a word. But yeah, it's pretty much the lens, that you're going to experience everything through.
Yeah.
And I've always been more fond of third person limited compared to first person. I don't know. Do you ever have any particular? I
think third person limited offers the most opportunity for like reveals, various types of things to come into play. I think it's an appealing one from that angle.
Yeah.
You can get into things. We've talked before about certain Michael Crichton writing playing out like a report and being very factual. So that's a different ballgame altogether, but for reveals and stuff and more engaging types of stories, third person limited I think offers a lot of options.
Yes, I would agree. And when we get to that, we can bring some of it up again.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're looking at first person, this is
again, essentially for me, it's always tracking the narrator in the story.
Yeah.
And the first person is usually, not always, but usually the protagonist and the narrator are one and the same.
Yeah.
You get a lot of, one of the huge benefits of writing in first person is you get that intimacy with the character that the reader might like.
Mm-hmm.
You know all their thoughts, and you experience everything the same at the same time they do. Well, usually, depending on how you write it. Their little sidebar, one thing I've noticed lately, you tend to see a lot more books today published in the present tense instead of the past tense.
Yeah.
You know, like instead of like he or she ran, it's he or she runs to the door and opens it. They try to give it that the way you would write a screenplay.
Yeah.
You would keep it in that present tense. I've seen that a lot more in books now. I'm going to go on the
Which
record.
is interesting.
I particularly don't think it makes a difference. Like
Yeah.
it's whatever you want to go with. I particularly
preference.
like the past tense, the traditional past tense. Like even though you're writing in past tense, I feel like it still evokes that the story is unfolding before you.
Well, that's like, Sandlot or Stand By Me. Like a character reflecting back that, it has that feeling of like nostalgia or, reverence or hindsight, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, can bring a certain wisdom to a piece of writing.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But yeah, I've always noticed, even if whether it's, and I've even asked this to people who are like avid readers too, eventually you don't notice the tense anymore, the past or present. I still champion for the past tense just because I think it's easier to work with. Than the present. I noticed that's just for me, trying to write screenplays back in the day. I always had trouble writing it in the present tense because it was just strange for me to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about anytime you're approaching. But I do think it's
could
something
be past tense, could be present tense, could be intense. You don't know.
Could be. The whole process is intense. But yeah, you never quite know what a reader might think. But I've always heard that your mind kind of, if the story is good, then that is something that kind of fades or gets lost in translation in a good way.
Well, like all things, it needs to serve a purpose.
Yes.
Like why are you doing what you can't ever just do something for the sake of it, or at the very least it needs to like stylistically fit in.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of at the core of what this whole episode's about, is because I will say there's a lot of books I've read lately where sometimes people can take the POV or they don't give it enough thought as to how,
or they're just trying to emulate something somebody else did.
They're trying to
or
emulate
something.
How someone else did it.
Yeah.
The one thing, so when you're looking at first person perspective, again, it grants you that access, that unfettered access to the protagonist. Usually the protagonist and the narrator, again, are the same or one and the same.
Yeah.
You get, I've even heard now, like, you'll hear all these different people start to label and categorize different ways of doing it, like deep POV, where you don't, again, this, I would argue this is more of a style thing, but kind of like the way you write certain words you put in, sort of like you don't say felt or anything, you go straight, you try to get into the character's mind as deep as you possibly can. You know, try to meld it, page and character one and the same, and that is not an easy feat to do.
No, not at all.
That is, I'd say, the biggest advantage that a first person narrative gives you. One of the disadvantages, though, to it, and one of the reasons I tend to stay away from it in my my practice book of writing, my scribbles that I do in my basement, is you lose scope with the first person narrative.
I'm a Listerine man myself.
Really? You go with the Listerine?
I've past few years I've been a Listerine man.
What flavor? Yeah. What flavor are you picking out?
I like the blue.
You like the blue? I don't even know what flavor that is.
I think it's like a spearmint.
No, I think the spearmint's the green.
You're right.
Spearmint's got the green, the aqua thing going on.
Yeah.
The blue, right?
Yeah, the blue.
Yeah. See?
Like a Powerade.
You don't even know what you're talking about right now.
I don't, but it's fine.
It's part of the show. It's
part of the allure.
Yeah, but you get that is one of the things you have to that is one of the things you have to consider with the first person perspective is you lose the bigger the story. Well, usually I should say the bigger the cast, the bigger the story is going to be.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, anytime you do something written in first person, everything has to be done through the eyes of that character. That is our complete lens into that world.
Yeah.
So if you have a much grander scale story, not that it can't be done in first person, it's just it's going to get a little bit trickier, and you're going to have your own challenges as to how you're going to get certain information across to the reader as the story goes along.
Yeah.
Well, one big thing too, and I'd say an advantage, or not even a disadvantage, it's a challenge that you get with, and we talked a little bit about this in our unreliable narrator episode, is you're getting a subjective point of view from the character and not always an objective one, which can be good or bad depending on how you want the story to be told.
Yeah. And like typically it's used in a deceptive way in the way we described it in that one.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm always cautious with first person because one, I'm not that good at writing, but two, one thing that has stuck with me is I feel like everyone goes for first person right off the bat.
Yeah.
And they tend to forget that you're not writing as yourself. You're writing as the character.
Well, yeah, that's the tricky part of it is you kind of have to step out of your own frame of mind a bit. And that's not an easy thing to do.
No. And I think that's something that it's a small little point, but it's a crucial one to think about when you're writing a first person story.
Yeah.
Keep in mind that it's not you telling this story. It's that character that you have chosen as your protagonist.
A lot of the time that can be an ego thing for a writer to like remove themselves from that, like you want to just, you have all the things in your mind, you want to be the one telling it, but it isn't yours. Like for all intents and purposes, it's not your story. It's the character.
Yeah, no, it's almost like you got to think of it if someone hires you to ghostwrite their memoir, the memoir is not yours or their autobiography. It's theirs. And you
Speaking
have to
of which,
write
Ghostwriter is an interesting movie.
Yes, no, that is a very interesting movie. And essentially, if no one knows, a ghostwriter is just someone who is contracted by somebody to take their thoughts and their ideas and turn them into prose. And then
oh my God, it's a ghost.
Y'all better watch out.
Y'all better get ready to watch out.
I always get that wrong. Y'all better get ready to watch out.
Well, it's such a weird sentence. It's easily done.
See, this is what I'm talking about. But yes, that is one thing with the first person that you have to, I think, keep an eye on when you're writing your story is try to remember that how would this person tell you that story? How would this character? You almost have to take on a little bit of an acting role in it. And that's one reason why for me, I have yet to venture into any hardcore first person stuff.
Well, I mean, it requires a lot of empathy on and a lot of the times a human being that doesn't exist, that's adding a layer of tricky on top of the already tricky.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I'd say some of the best examples of like first person narratives you have like Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
And one science fiction novel. It'll come to me. Give me
eventually. An author or a context.
I'm blanking right now on it.
It's all right. You'll get it.
I'm blanking right now. Anyway.
Let it breathe. As soon as you stop thinking about it, it'll come to you.
Left Hand of Darkness. There it is.
There you go.
By Ursula Le Guin. Great science fiction story if you've never read it. And that doesn't always mean that the protagonist has to be the narrator. I think of another example where more of a side character you're telling the story through their eyes, but the main character, the protagonist, is actually not them. I'd say the most famous example is Great Gatsby.
Yeah.
You look at that from... It is written from a first-person perspective. Nick Carraway, we're seeing it from his eyes. He's our narrator, but the main character is Gatsby. Obviously, he's the titular character. And I've always wondered, I'm assuming Fitzgerald understood this. I don't know. I'm just guessing. This is just my own take on it. But I think that it has to be on purpose because of the revelation, the mystery of who Gatsby is. Nobody knows who he is in the beginning. Where did he get his money from? Who is he? What's his backstory? If you were to change that, and it'd be interesting little, of like writing exercise to do. If you change that and turn that story from his perspective, make the protagonist and the narrator the same person.
Yeah.
Does the mystery of who he is, do you lose it? Mm-hmm. Is it nearly as good?
Well, and another interesting fact in the specific case of Gatsby, I mean, like a lot of people don't realize that Nick Carraway is actually Spider-Man.
That's true. Everyone forgets
and it's a really subtle theme throughout that movie.
That's actually his origin story because when he's traveling from East Egg to West Egg through the
he sees the Green Goblin on the other side of the water.
The place, the Ashland place, I forget what they call it in between. That's when he actually gets bit by a radioactive spider at a gas station. and begins to, and then goes to Hell's Kitchen and meets Daredevil.
Yeah, who played by Ben Affleck.
But yes, just something to think about when we get into kind of like when we get towards the end, I'll talk about like multiple POVs. I always kind of caution the first person perspective because I think it has some unique challenges that people tend to forget when they're writing it. At least that's what I found. I'm only speaking for my own.
Yeah, of course.
Own experience. Second person, we're kind of just going to skip over that one a little bit for today. Like I said, that's the you,
which is fair because it is underutilized.
Yeah, there are some like interesting, I think, stories out there that try to use the second person, which is, again, it's you, your, and yours. It almost kind of is like a play on the present tense, but trying to make sure that you literally, the reader, are the protagonist in a weird way. And one of the examples I have here at the outline, I've actually never read them, but The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde, and then Pants Are Optional. I do like that.
That sounds like a very Matt Hahn book if I've ever heard of.
Yeah. Pants Are Optional.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the common example I always see is the old classic Choose Your Own Adventure books, or even like early video games had that. I think of when we talked about Resident Evil last year.
Yeah.
The writing of it, kind of a weird blend of like, yeah, there's a character, but if you go back, the way the text is written is it's written toward you.
Yeah.
It's written in that second person. It's acknowledging, second person is acknowledging the reader or the audience out loud. Not out loud, but it's sort of breaking that fourth wall. So definitely an interesting thing to play around with if you want to be experimental. It is one of those things where I stress caution because I'm a journeyman writer at best, so I'm not a master.
Stop limiting yourself.
Maybe when I reach 300, maybe then. But
you are such a painfully humble man.
No. It's true. I mean, I'm always working on it. But
yeah, everybody's constantly go easy on yourself. You're fine.
But it's definitely one of those things. Do it like you said earlier. Don't do it just to do it or to be cute or to just be like, oh, look what I did. Because if you don't do it well, it's going to fall apart. I would say the second person, it's something that you either got to hit the home, you either got to knock it out of the park, or you're going to strike out. There's kind of no in between.
You have to earn the respect of your readers or your audience. And in order to do that, you have to show a well-wrapped package we've talked about in the past. It has to be something that has all the corners tucked behind. It has to be neatly folded in, You fold it in. David, just fold in the cheese.
So yes, just something to think about if you do decide to go with second person.
Yeah, for sure.
Next, now we come to my favorite, third person limited edition.
Ooh, limited dish.
You damn right it's limited. No cup holder, no back seat.
LTD. Limited Liability Corporation.
Yes, a limited liability company. Oh, corporation, yes.
Yeah.
Is it corporation or company? I guess it doesn't matter. Anyway.
I think I've actually heard it both. I think you can have it either way.
You can be whatever you want. Yeah, I mean, technically.
You can have whatever you like.
Like Thor said, all words are made up. And
exactly.
He's not wrong. Anyway.
He's not wrong.
But yes. I would say this is one of the most common POVs out there, at least in literature right now. And I think it's just because, for me, it's the most accessible. You don't kind of have to, best way I have learned to describe it is you're kind of getting the best of both worlds of the first person and then what we're going to talk about, the third person omniscient. Well, maybe we should skip. What do you think? Should I skip over and go to third person omniscient first? Or
you tell me.
Okay, I'm gonna skip what I said about limited. We're gonna go real quick to third person omniscient.
Okie doke.
It uses third person omniscient. Let's go over this. The difference of what pronouns you're gonna use.
Yeah.
You'll have the he, the she. What else? You'll have him, her, they, their. You're looking at it from. You're no longer necessarily inside the character's head. This would be almost how, if I were to tell you a story or vice versa, and then we recount that story to someone else after the fact, we would be saying, well, that's when he turned the car the wrong way and we fell off a cliff.
That's when Nick Carraway slung his web out the window.
But yes, with omniscient, and of course it's kind of in that you have this separated, like all-knowing character who is not limited to any particular character's perspective. A lot of people will argue that this is one of the oldest forms of like a point of view. You see it a lot in like mythology, in religious stories. You'll see there's that removed narrator.
Yeah.
And one of the good things about it is the brevity in it. Excuse me.
If you're not into the whole brevity thing.
It gives you that ability to head hop to characters. You have that you are fully in charge of what character's perspective we're going to see and what character's perspective we're not in certain moments.
Yeah.
You can slide in different rules about the world or different like facts. Two of the biggest ones I can think of that use omniscient is Lord of the Rings and Dune, which we've talked about before. That omniscience works so well with, go back and think of like Paul Atreides and the prescience that you talked about in the episode.
Yeah. The way Herbert writes that stuff is brain bendy.
Yeah.
Covers so much ground.
Yeah. And if you were to, it's that brevity of what you could tell, what would take so much longer to get across in a first person or third person limited perspective, what might take maybe like, we'll say 2 or 3 pages, 4 or 5, depending on respectively for those, you can get across in a single page or a paragraph in Omniscient. So you're able to, because you can freely move around and know what any character is thinking or doing, or you can literally take those deep dives into their head, into their soul, their consciousness. It gives you that ability to play with the emotions of the reader too. You get that. The big thing with this is dramatic irony, I'd say, which is, you see it a lot in movies.
You've brought up several times.
Yeah, where you the audience know more than the characters.
Yeah.
Now, you can still accomplish this in the other POVs. I just think that Omniscient lets you do it so much faster and so much more economically.
Yeah.
If you're going to do it in a first person, then you're most likely going to have to switch. You're going to have multiple POVs to start to bring in dramatic irony. Because again, in the traditional first person perspective, if the main character, if the protagonist narrator does not know it or knows what's going on, then by that rule, you, the reader, cannot know what's going on either.
Yeah, it's that balancing act of keeping those different things in play in order to achieve.
It's that argument too of surprise versus suspense. The first person would rely more heavily on surprise. Omniscient is going to rely more heavily on suspense.
When you said surprise, I just thought of Derek Zoolander in the mine jumping out. Surprise! I don't know why that popped into my head. I'm not doing so hot over here.
But yeah, no, it's definitely something to think about. Now, the challenges of it is I think it can be extremely difficult to write because you are doing the head hopping and you can confuse the reader very quickly. I have yet to attempt to write something in Omniscient. So I guess I would say that I might even say that Omniscient can be a little bit more difficult than first person because of that ability. The thing that makes it good is also the thing that makes it tough. And, can be the downfall of the writing if you don't do it well.
Yeah.
Because you have that ability to go back and forth and introduce new facts and figures at will, you, can alienate the reader and they don't have a character to latch on to.
Yeah. If it's not, like you said, if it's not done well, and in the cases of Dune and Lord of the Rings, the world building's so heavy that I think it's almost kind of goes with the territory of seeing that much of the world.
Like I said, a lot of people would say this is one of the oldest forms, like telling a story around a campfire. I think of something almost, Are You Afraid of the Dark? The series, how the kids would always tell those stories. You have this completely removed narrator from the world. They are in no way in that world in any sense. So you get the ability of being able to dish out the drama, a more curated form of it, but you lose that intimacy that you get with a first person perspective. So just something always to keep in mind if you go with the Omniscient. Now it might be better to start at the end and then go back to the beginning.
Go back to the beginning.
Otherwise, it just gets all.
Just tell us what happened. Oh man, what a
now I apologize. Now we'll go with what I think is my
never apologize.
Oh no, I'm going to keep doing it. Third person limited. I think this will make it easier just because now that you kind of know what the other two, what the farther ends of the spectrum are. Third person limited for me is sort of the middle ground between first person and omniscient.
Yeah.
It uses the same pronouns and words as omniscient, he, his, she, hers, they, their, all that. This is where the narrator is still sort of is removed like an omniscient, but can only go and reveal the thoughts, feelings, understanding of a single character at any given time. So you can't, and you would, and I could hear someone saying like, well, how is that any different from omniscient? The difference being is you're almost approaching this like you would a first person perspective, first person POV. Difference being is in this, you have a little bit more wiggle room. This is kind of if you took the two and sort of blended them together. You're using that omniscience, a little bit of the omniscience that you get if you're in a room with a character, for example, and someone behind him, let's say, or her, has a knife and is about to stab them. In first person, if their back is to them and they don't know it, you can't reveal that. You would have to then just write it out that, and all of a sudden he felt the sting of a knife in his back. So it's a surprise.
Yeah.
You get that surprise factor. In omniscient, you would talk about in omniscient, you could talk about if the knife had a personality, or you could go off on a tangent for a little bit and say this knife has a history of it was forged on the day 200 years ago, and then it went here, and then it was by accident it finally found its way into Scott's back or something.
Scotty doesn't know.
Limited kind of gives you the little bit of the best of both worlds there on that one. You can get into the head and the feelings of your character, your POV character, your limited character of that scene that you're picking.
Yeah.
And you can also at the same time say, but he was unaware or she was unaware of the sulking figure behind them with a knife. You don't have to do that, but you can. It gives you the opportunity to work around sort of issues and challenges that might come up as you start to write your story.
Yeah.
So one for me that I like doing that one is, and I believe, to quote me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Harry Potter books are written in third person limited, I think.
That sounds correct to me.
Yeah.
From what I remember.
Ask if I'm right or wrong on that, but I believe they're third person limited. I don't think it's
that sounds right.
But
no, it's definitely not omniscient. But.
The game Song of Ice and Fire is a third person limited.
Yeah.
Every chapter is from every chapter has the name of the character, the point of view character that you're going to see it from. And the limited name is essentially right there and there, right in the title, because you have to tell it through that character's perspective, but you have more wiggle room.
We've piqued my curiosity actually. How I actually have not read them. How does the Witcher series play out? I can't remember if you read those or not.
I have not read those. Let's see.
Okay, then disregard that.
Let me look it up here.
Because I know there's like a lot of cross comparativeness between like Witcher, R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones, and Harry Potter. Like there's a lot of interesting crossplay there.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find.
I'd just be curious to know.
Like I think originally they were short stories, and then he started to put them together, which is not uncommon.
Yeah. Gotta start somewhere, as they say.
I think Witcher is written like Song of Ice and Fire, but don't quote me on that because I've never read them. I can't find the answer right this second.
Well, that's fine.
I think it's written like Song of Ice and Fire, where you have your lead group of characters, and every chapter is a different character, and every chapter just has the name.
That's interesting.
Eddard, Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, and everything is then told through their perspective. And again, you start to build different layers with this. And the one thing about limited for me, I don't know, and this just might be just because how I like to write, and maybe when you're trying to find like your style, your voice in writing, this tends to work easier for me. Like it sort of eliminates the need for me to write as the main character, write as the protagonist, the narrator in the first person, and eliminates the need for me to make sure that I don't head hop too much or make sure that I am getting everything across in such a fluent and masterful way. This is kind of for me the training ground for me is third person limited. That is not to say that it's still easy. I mean, writing anything is difficult.
Yeah, you got to know the animal.
Yeah, and that's not to there to say that it's the weakest of the 3 main points of view. I just think it is definitely the more forgiving of the three.
Well, it's like tools in a toolbox. You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a screw as the purpose, but not for all things.
Yeah. Hammer to screw in a screw.
I've actually seen people try it, so what do I know?
Isn't that the hammer on a nail? Anyway.
I've watched it. I've watched it done. We'll say.
So yes, for limited, I think it's something that is really good if the story sort of supports itself. And we talk about, this is where you get a little bit of like prose. If certain books will have that language, that flowery language where the way it's written draws attention to itself. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a style.
Yeah.
I am more of the economical side, or the craftsman side of it, where I don't want my writing to stand out necessarily. I just want it to be functional. I want the story and the characters to stand out as opposed to my writing. So I want it to be as blueprint almost as I can be, and how I'm gonna state it and how the sentences are. For me, that's what Third Person Limited offers me the best options that I currently need. Now, maybe one day down the road, I start to tackle more first person perspective, third person omniscient possibly. But
yeah,
I particularly like the Third Person Limited because of its more flexible nature and how you can work with it. And it allows you to focus. I'd say the biggest thing is it allows me to focus more on making sure the characters that I'm writing are developed, making sure that the plot's working, that the world is flushed out. It allows me to have to not focus too much on the prose. I can kind of put that a little bit lower on the to-do list because I'm writing in Third Person Limited. I know the rules and I know what I can get away with, and I don't have to be so strung, so tightly packed as you would in first person with the trappings that you can get into with first person or omniscient. Yeah, that's what I personally like about Third Person Limited, is it gives you that ability to do a deep dive POV when you need to at certain moments, and then pull back and maybe move away from that character for a little while. It works well in bigger worlds. So it kind of gives you the ability to stay close to a protagonist and allow your reader to attach without worrying too much about having to become that character fully as the writer, as you're writing it.
Yeah.
So now the fourth person POV, we'll just touch on this kind of briefly because this is a new one to me, and I'm just going to kind of like read it.
Yeah, you've got me curious on this one.
Yeah, because I've never encountered this yet, but according to this, says the fourth person POV is a narrative perspective that tells a story with a collective voice. It uses we, us, our, and ours to represent multiple characters speaking as a single narrator.
So the Borg.
Yeah, no, that would be a good example.
Like an internal story from the perspective of the Borg.
Yeah, an internal. Yeah, that would be interesting. Again, this kind of falls in with the second person, that it can be a little bit on the experimental side of how you want to do things.
That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
Like there's a lot of ways you could play with that, but I'd be interested to see like something like honed out to actually like function narratively like that. That'd be a tricky nut to crack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fourth person, that one's really new to me. I know nothing really about that, so I won't talk too much, but it was just interesting to see, because that, in preparation for today, this was only maybe the second or third time I've heard it before.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to find out like what certain things have been using that. I guess it's become more popular in the more recent years.
Yeah.
But writing that perspective, that POV, what one do you want to pick? All comes down to the story that you want to tell and what you're going to get across. A lot of fantasy stories tend to stick to the third person, because the omniscient or the limited, because that gives them room to get across, because the world and the setting in fantasy stories tend to have, we talked about this in our fantasy episode, I believe, that world building can be a challenge for a writer, especially a new writer. How do you set up the laws, the rules, the customs, the cultures, the weather of this?
Because oftentimes, like if you're doing like a world building type piece, like it all has to be new and like deeply thought out. It's a lot, and it usually takes years to accomplish.
No, it absolutely does. So that's, you see a lot of science fiction will be that too, but a lot of science, you can see a lot of sci-fi, like I said, in first person. It all comes down to like what's like your core question. And what vehicle do you think is going to work best for this story?
A Ford Fiesta.
I got a party in my Ford Fiesta. But just I wanted to read a couple tips here just to kind of close it out.
Yeah.
Something on the outline that I think is like good to keep in mind. The more characters you have, the bigger the scope, the bigger the story is going to ultimately be. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand too with the next tip. Don't add more points of view just to do it.
Yeah, don't complicate things just for the sake of complicating.
Yeah. I think that's one thing, especially I tend to sometimes get in trouble with. I have to stop myself. You have to understand, like, okay, do I need multiple points of view? Do I need 8 points of view? Do I need 12 or 15? Maybe I only need 2. Maybe I only need 1. These are questions you have to ask yourself as you go through the story. And it's okay if you don't know them right away. But I would say don't ever just add it just to add it.
Maybe you're doing a German time traveling series where you have the perspective of every single person from an entire town over the course of
I was going to bring that up.
years.
It was like it's dark. I was going to close it with, because when you were talking about Oppenheimer, save that for real quick here. Let me go through this.
Got it.
But one thing to sort of help you with that is ask yourself, have the characters work to get that POV. I think that's a good way of putting it is, look, there are characters in a story that are simply there to be in the background. That's all. Not to, you always want to approach it as that this character has a life, has their own, fleshed out world, and you can, if you want to. That's just going to take you more time. But if someone literally is just there to be the role of a waiter in the restaurant, a police officer answering a call or something, if they are simply there to be the background character, then that's their purpose in this story. It doesn't mean that they can't have their own story.
Well, it's also too, like, sometimes that type of character can be there just to reveal a piece of information to another character. Like, they can help a realization. They can, do something small to push the story forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just an idea of making sure that you understand the hierarchy of the characters. There is a hierarchy in the story. It's not to belittle or say that you shouldn't think a little bit about it or maybe name the character if you want. It's just that in reference to the story that you are telling, their purpose is background. That is it. Nothing else. And that would give you, then from there, you kind of go up. Like, does this person need a POV? Or can they be in a scene with one of the main characters? And always make sure, if you're having multiple viewpoints, again, kind of going back to what I said about first person, is make sure that there is that bit of unique voice in when the characters talk. When you do a line, someone says,
"Hey." Doing a line.
Not that kind of line. It's important to make sure that you develop characters' voices if you're going to explore multiple POVs. Also, to never mix first and third without a reason. Again, kind of going back to what we said just a few minutes ago. Make sure there's a good reason if you're going to. I've seen some stories where certain characters tell their story from first person, and then we switch and certain characters will be told from third person.
Yeah.
I'm not too big a fan of this. It's very jarring for me. I just pick one and let me go with that. Pick one person.
Like commit to a line and follow it.
Yeah, that's just my own personal take. I'm not a huge fan of the back and forth of first person to third, omniscient. I tried to read a book once where it was using all 3 POVs. There was an omniscient narrator recounting the story as a fantasy story, recounting the story of this incident. I don't know what the incident was because I never finished it. Recounting this incident to his king. He's like telling like an epistolary story, but he knows everything that's going to happen. But he's only talking in footnotes in the story at the bottom of the page. And then there's these 2 main characters. There's the protagonist, and he tells all the story of his youth in first person. And then the main antagonist, I guess, tells the rest of his story in third person, limited.
Oh, God. That's like even more convoluted than like the stacking perspectives of Inception.
I was like, I can't get through this. I always feel bad because I try to finish every book I read.
Yeah, just so you can have like
that one. I just couldn't because I was like, I can't get past like this. I just couldn't get it. So I literally had to like look up, is there a reason for this? Like, is there some huge reveal? Like, I need someone to tell me, yes, the payoff is worth it. Payoff was not worth it. So yes, always make sure. I stress just picking one and going with it, because if you're going to change points of view, don't hide that. And that was one thing too, is that book tended to hide it a little bit, and it just
that's no good.
Yeah,
that gets confusing.
So no, those are just quick overview here of the POV points of view when it comes to writing a book. And the 3 main ones, you got the first person, third person limited, and third person omniscient. Definitely something to consider if you're interested in taking those writing endeavors. But yeah, you're thinking about Dark there.
Yeah, for sure.
That I guess that could almost be the cinematic equivalent of third person omniscient, maybe.
Yeah.
It's interesting to apply this to film. Like how, where and
especially series like long form
was written in first person, the script.
Yeah.
I'm curious if that translated across across the screen.
I think that was done singularly for like just Killian's interpretation of the performance
of it, yeah.
But you know, I also to like galvanize the entire thing and do like a singular biopic because it was such a scaled thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, that'd be interesting to try and see what is the equivalent. I mean, you have it in movies where the first person, like one of the famous first person narrated movies, The Sunset Boulevard, everything is told from his perspective. You get a lot. You get that voiceover narration that I can definitely see as here's the equivalent in cinema. But yeah, it different take on it.
Yeah, for sure. The whole thing is interesting. It shows like, you know, it's really the scope of how you're going to convey your story. And that's a big part of the whole process.
Yeah. Just something I think to consider and give a little bit more time to of, okay, I have my story, I have my characters. Put it there in the beginning of the process, though, of how do I want to tell this? Do I want to?
Yeah, it's like you have your ingredients. How the hell are you going to
how are you going to prepare it? Am I going to bake it? Am I going to use a griddle? Am I going to use a grill? Am I going to use a fire and roast it on a spit? Whatever.
Yeah. Are you Hannibal and you're going to wrap it in a human thigh and then put it in clay?
Or that too. But yes, don't underestimate the importance of choosing what POV you're going to use to tell your story.
Yeah,
yep.
Sure.
Definitely worth keeping in mind.
I was trying to think of a good thing to add there and I was drawing a blank. I'm sorry.
You know, my scribbles that I do in my basement. That sounds weird. Cut that, please.
Cut that.